are going to talk about assessing first-year students' interactional competence. So I'm going to give you an idea of how they look like, what kind of activity is this, and then how we use this activity as an assessment tool and the kind of rubric that we developed to assess the students' interactional competence for that specific activity. So I would like to start talking a little bit about how we decided to incorporate interactional competence in our courses. So we started to see that our students had very limited practice, and also that we didn't have enough assessment tools to know how they were doing in terms of spoken language. We wanted to send them to the wild. We wanted to send them to talk to L1 speakers of the target language. And that's what we did because we thought that that would be a good way for them to practice more what they were learning in the classroom. And we right away thought that would be a good way for us to assess what they were doing in terms of interactional competence, how they would interact with these L1 speakers. This was hard for the students. They would have a hard time. And once we saw this, we realized that even though they have a little bit of linguistic ability at the third semester, they couldn't interact. They would freeze very often when they had any trouble in the conversation. So we decided that we needed to start teaching them how to interact since the first semester. In terms of instruction, we started incorporating lessons, specific lessons on interactional competence. Those lessons include a lot of analysis of authentic dialogues, both dialogues between L1 speakers of the language and also the videos that the students record of their own interactions with L1 speakers. Many times we use them for analysis and teaching in the classroom. So the conversations are a very important teaching tool as well. And they are also an assessment tool, and they are combined with other assessment instruments. So for assessment, we've been using, for instance, written exercise. So we ask students to complete the transcription of a conversation with a turn, with a sequence of turns. Sometimes we ask them to replace a turn that we kind of don't think that is appropriate for that specific context, things like that. Our conversations are a very important assessment tool for us. And we've been using also the videos that the students record as a way for them to reflect on what they do. So many times we ask them to go back to these videos, transcribe part of the conversations, and say, well, what could you have done in this specific turn that you didn't do and would have been more successful? So what would you say in this moment, for instance? Things like that. So as you can see, the conversations are one of our very, very important instruments in terms of teaching as well as assessment. I'm going to tell you how we guide the students to start talking to L1 speakers. So we pair them. They have to find a classmate to work with, and then the two of them will find an L1 speaker of the target language. They are instructed to meet with this L1 speaker 4 times throughout the semester. They are instructed to talk from 5 to 10 minutes. They have to video record the first and the last interaction. After the video recording, they bring these videos and they have to watch the videos again, and then with the videos in their hands, they have to complete a self-assessment checklist in which they have to assess specific interactional practices. We are going to talk a little bit more about that. And then they have to write a reflection on how the conversation went. There are no topics for these interactions. We just tell them, go talk, and let's see what happens. So now I would like to kind of show you how this conversations, this activity, is integrated into the teaching and is interacting with what we do in the classroom. So I'll start with this first interaction. They go talk, video record it, and practice a little bit, and bring this back to the classroom, and then they have to fill out the self-assessment checklist and the reflection. In this self-assessment checklist that they complete when they assess what they did, we decided to include three for us, very important aspects that we saw they were lacking when we watched the first videos, like the ones that you saw earlier, which are expanding on the topic of conversation first, second, asking for clarification and help when there is any trouble in communication, and third, participation, which for us included being an active listener and an active speaker in the conversation. So then we start teaching them how to expand on the topic of conversation, how to be an active listener, how we start giving lessons on these different aspects in the classroom, okay? So then they are more prepared to see how it looks like. So then okay, you had the lesson, so you go back, you talk 2 more times with this native speakers again, you practice what you've learned, then you come back to the classroom. So now let's reflect on what you did in your first conversation. So let's transcribe part of your conversation and discuss what went wrong here and what you could have done. And let's see if you can come up with different turns and complete your conversation in a different way. So once they had, we were able to raise their awareness and teach them some of these practices. They go out for their last conversation. They video record it again. They watch their video. They complete the self-assessment checklist 1 more time. And then we use the rubric to give them a grade for what they did in terms of interaction. We understand that when we use these videos and these conversations as our object of evaluate what the student is doing in terms of interactional competence, we are dealing not only with the linguistic ability that the student has, but also with social abilities, for instance, and this is all mixed. How can we tease these things apart? It's very hard. We think that we also know that some people would point to drawbacks of using these videos in terms of, well, how can you say that the success or if the conversation is not successful, how much of that is related to the performance of the student? Because the success of the conversation depends also on how the interlocutor does, on the topic of conversation. We have to take into account the fact that there is a gap in linguistic knowledge when we have L1 speakers and students in the same conversation, and that all plays a very important role in the whole process. And it becomes very difficult to tease these things apart when we are assigning the student a grade, right? But we also think that there are advantages on the process, being that when we compare this conversation with role plays, for instance, I think they resemble much more what happens in real life. So they are unpredictable as any regular conversation, any natural conversation that we have. The students have to co-construct the conversation with the L1 speaker. This reflects what they are going to do in real life when they go out to talk to other speakers of that language. And I think we also can increase social ecological validity of the type of assessment that we are using when we are closer to what happens in real conversations.
We came up with 2 assessment tools, the first one being the assessment, self-assessment, and the rubric. They were created separately because we wanted to make sure that the students get a chance to reflect back on their conversation, to get a chance to look and see what happened, what did they do well, what didn't they do, and also what is their perception of how successful they were, because we realized that there are also sometimes a gap between their understanding and what's really happening. What they would call for them that they were able to expand actually was not an expansion, or what they thought that we did react appropriately, it was actually absolutely not an appropriate reaction because there was such a misunderstanding that they didn't even understand each other. So that was not appropriate. So that helped the student, the self-assessment checklist was at the beginning. There were two separate documents that we wanted to raise students' awareness, and then we were using the rubric in order to have clear criteria. And both documents and assessment tools were used to help with the enhanced students' learning and to help identifying the gaps, because as my colleague mentioned, instruction and assessment are linked, and they are each one feeding into each other. So in order for us to be successful, we needed to recognize those gaps, go back if needed, and review what was needed, or teach and create new teaching material for them. While merging those two documents in a way that it's more efficient and it's more transparent to the students as well, so they know what is it that we are doing. So in the documents that you do have that are in your tables, which is this combination of assessment and rubric. So the way that it works is that, as you can see, there is a column for the students where they can mark using check marks on things that did happen in their conversations, and there is a time justification. We don't want the student to just put a check mark. We want to know, when did it happen? You did say that I asked a question, when was that? So we will go back and I will check, and we will either confirm or we will say, no, it did not happen. As far as the conversation practices they go, we chose for the first one expanding on a topic. So we wanted to make sure that it is included, and in our lessons we did include those, the work on expansion, and how can we help them understand how to go beyond what they are doing, to recognize those moments where expansion is not happening, and also how they can contribute, because we told them that this is a co-constructed conversation. It's not happening if there is one person who is actively in the conversation. You need to be also an active participant in the conversation. As far as clarification, as you can see in the video that my colleague just showed you, they didn't know oftentimes how to deal with a repair. So they wouldn't understand, or there was a misunderstanding, and sometimes they would just say yes to solve the problem. And I've had situations where it was beyond clear that the students never understood the question. I even had a question, he was asked, so like you ski? And we were talking about sports, and she said, I think so. And I realized, well, it's not happening. She didn't just want to be in that situation where she doesn't want to ask another question. So they were not dealing with misunderstanding, and then some of them were just relying on their English in order to get it over with, because they just didn't want to say, how do you ask this, or explain what they're talking about, or give more explanation. And then as far as the participation, we've had a lot of students who were really passive. They were just, again, sitting there waiting for their interlocutor to do the job for them, and nothing was happening. They were like, or they were, because they were paired up, one student was speaking, the other one was just sitting very comfortably. No comments whatsoever. Even if that person, the first one, would say, I broke my arm yesterday, nothing. You would not hear anything from them. So we didn't want that for them. We just wanted to make sure, in a real conversation, if your friend said he broke his arm, are you going to just sit quietly and just what? Look at them? Probably, hopefully not. Maybe it does happen. So once we covered this new version of our assessment/rubric, we did dedicate a certain number of points. So we decided to go from 3 to 5, which would be good, very good, and excellent. And the reasoning behind it was that, as Michelin brought up so many important factors that comes to play when we do have an assessment and we do have those interactions. There are so many variables. We cannot control, and maybe we don't even want to control our interlocutor. We don't know how those interlocutors or those L1 speakers do behave with our students. So it's not only our students in that situation, there's so much more happening in that moment. Or they suddenly start talking about the topic that is out of their reach, and they don't know how to close that topic and start a new one. So because of that, we just realized that we don't want to give them any grades or any number of points that is lower at 3, because it would just really bring their grade down, and it just is not really meaningful for them. So that is the system that we have chosen for now. At the same time, we have decided that we will only choose what is relevant to that specific conversation. So let's say that in a conversation a repair doesn't happen. Are they going to be penalized because the repair didn't happen? Well, no, we're not going to even take into consideration that part. So we will only pick and choose what is relevant to that specific conversation that we are looking at. I think that my colleague would briefly just show you is the last conversation that she collected from her students.
Yeah, I just got this conversation from my second semester students of Spanish. And you see that they've been studying for just 2 semesters, so they don't know much. But it's so impressive how much they can do with so little knowledge of the language.